Alvin Plantinga's modal ontological argument. So today, I'll be covering Alvin Plantinga's modal ontological argument for the existence of God. So this argument uses pure reason. So I'll put it into short for you here, then I'll continue the rest. Here it is. If it's possible that a MGB or a maximally great being exists, it follows logically that he must exist. Now, I'll explain the premises and refute some common objections thoroughly. Plantinga's version is a modern, modal logic-based argument for the existence of God. It uses possible worlds to show that God's existence is not just possible, but necessary. Key definitions. First, a maximally great being is a being that is great in every possible respect, specifically a being that is omnipotent, all-powerful, omniscient, all-knowing, morally perfect, necessary, exists in every possible world. Contingent versus necessary existence. Contingent could exist, could not exist, like you or me. Necessary must exist in every possible world, cannot not exist. Possible worlds. These are ways the universe could have been. A possible world is a complete description of reality. Something is necessary if it exists in every possible world. Something is possible if it exists in at least one possible world. The argument. Step by step 1. Definition. It is possible that a maximally great being, MGB, exists. Justification. This is not asserting that God exists, just that it could exist. Plantinga says this is conceivable and coherent. There's nothing logically contradictory about a being that is maximally great. If a maximally great being exists, then it exists in some possible world. Justification. This follows from the definition. By definition, if MGB exists, it must exist in at least one possible world, because that's what possible existence means. If a maximally great being exists in some possible world, then it exists in every possible world. Justification. Because an MGB is defined as necessary in its existence, it has maximal greatness. A being that is maximally great in one possible world cannot fail to exist in any other possible world. If it could fail to exist somewhere, it wouldn't be maximally great. Its greatness would be contingent, not necessary. Therefore, if it is possible that a maximally great being exists, it exists in every possible world. Justification. This follows logically from premises 1 to 3 using modal logic. Possible leads to necessary for a being defined as maximally great. Therefore, a maximally great being exists in the actual world. Justification. If it exists in every possible world, then it exists in our world, which is one of the possible worlds. So, God exists necessarily and not just as a possibility. Now, I'll be responding to some of the objections to these one by one. 1. God isn't necessarily existent. My response being necessary existence is part of the definition of maximal greatness. If God were contingent, God wouldn't be maximally great. This is a definitional property, not an empirical claim. 2. It's possible God doesn't exist. My response being, modal logic only requires coherence. The premise is, it's possible a maximally great being exists. If the concept is logically coherent, the premise is justified. 3. Inverted argument. Evil God. My response being, the argument relies on the coherence of the concept. Most philosophers argue maximal evil is logically inconsistent because an all-powerful evil being cannot exist without limits. Plus, Plantinga's definition includes maximal moral perfection, excluding evil. 4. Existence is not a predicate. My response being, Plantinga uses modal logic, not classical predication. The argument shows, if a maximally great being is possible, then existence is necessary across possible worlds. It's about necessity and modal logic, not defining existence as a property in the empirical sense. 5. Non-sentient world, empty world objection. My response being, the argument doesn't rely on humans existing in all worlds. God's necessary existence is independent of contingent features, like sentient beings. God's existence is possible and necessary even in worlds without Observer 6. Imagining existence, then defining it into existence. My response being, this misrepresents Plantinga. He doesn't define existence into reality. He defines maximal greatness to include necessary existence. The argument only shows that if maximal greatness is coherent, necessity logically follows. 7. Maximally great being is incoherent. My response being, philosophers like Plantinga argue the concept is logically coherent. There's no contradiction in omnipotence, plus omniscience, plus moral perfection, plus necessary existence. Coherence is enough for the argument to proceed. 8. Premise 1 is weak. My response being, premise 1 is intentionally minimal. It does not assert existence, only coherence. As long as the concept is not self-contradictory, premise 1 is justified. 9th objection. Last but not least, here it goes. Isn't it question begging? So, I'm just going to use inspiring philosophy's answer to this objection, as they have the best response in my personal opinion. Here it goes. Well, before we can answer this, we first need to know what it means to beg the question. Begging the question is a logical fallacy when the conclusion of an argument is considered to be proven without any new information other than what is given in one premise. In other words, a statement refers to its own assertion to prove its assertion. A quick and simple example of something begging the question is an argument like this. That guy is ugly because he is unattractive. Therefore, he is ugly. As you can see, this argument refers to its own assertion of the guy being unattractive to prove its conclusion that the guy is ugly. There are no independent reasons given in order to argue that the guy is ugly other than its own assertion. Therefore, it begs the question. So, does the ontological argument beg the question? Skeptics say it does, because in the argument, God by definition is necessary, and anything that is necessary must exist. So God must exist because he is necessary. In other words, skeptics say this amounts to saying God is necessary, therefore he exists. So they say the first premise is equivalent to the conclusion. So the argument just reduces to, it is possible that it is necessary that a maximally great being exists. Therefore, God exists. Therefore, the argument begs the question. Now, if this was the argument, then it would beg the question. But this is a bad representation. The first thing to note is it confuses de dicto and de re. De dicto refers to the necessity of a statement. De re refers to the necessity of a thing. This premise makes necessity part of the statement, whereas the ontological argument uses necessity as a property of God, which is de re. Dr. William Lane Craig says, the first premise of the ontological argument asserts that a certain statement is possible, namely the statement that a maximally great being exists, or that maximal greatness is exemplified. It is not the statement, "It is possible," that it is necessary that a maximally excellent being exists. This statement involves the iteration of two modalities, de dicto. It is also important to remember the argument is valid through deductive reasoning, not through a reductionist process. The nature of a deductive argument is that the conclusion is already hidden in the premises, waiting to be revealed by the rules of logic. Trying to reduce the argument really doesn't affect the nature of the actual argument. If skeptics wish to reduce the argument, they need to do it properly, as Peter S. Williams has done in his version of the argument. Now, it should be obviously clear this version doesn't beg the question. Despite saying that God is necessary in the first premise, the argument still leaves open the possibility in the second premise that God could be possible or impossible. If it begged the question, it would only rely on information from one single premise, and this version clearly doesn't do that. Now, some skeptics will argue, well, that's not even the point. The fact that the first premise is equivalent to the conclusion shows that the argument begs the question. Well, to your surprise, I actually agree with this. The ontological argument does show that the first premise is equivalent to the conclusion. Where I disagree with skeptics is that this means the argument begs the question. There are some very important things skeptics are overlooking. The first being that this is the argument's intention. It is supposed to show that the first premise is logically equivalent to the conclusion through deductive reasoning. That is the whole point. If skeptics are right, then the argument intentionally begs the question. But that would be absurd. The problem is, skeptics are assuming that question begging and circular reasoning mean the same thing. Most people think they do, but actually, this has not been the case, going all the way back to Aristotle. They are similar, but they do mean different things. This is pointed out in the book Understanding Arguments. First off, in contrast to begging the question, circular reasoning happens if there is a premise, either implicit or explicit, that is equivalent to the conclusion. So, the premise and the conclusion must have the same truth conditions. Now, in most cases, circular reasoning is a problem. However, if an argument is meant to inform instead of persuade, it is still valid and can be used. A good way circular reasoning is used is to simplify a piece of data in a theory. Scientific theories distinctly rely on this kind of circular reasoning. So, if this happens, the argument avoids begging the question. In contrast, remember, an argument begs the question if it only relies on information from one single premise in order to prove the conclusion. Now, in most cases, an argument is, "All right, guys, that's pretty much it. Leave any objections in my comments, and I'll respond. And on the next video, I'll be responding to people who has a nihilistic framework on God, saying what he does is meaningless or anything alike. All right, that's pretty much it. Have a good day. Bye-bye.